Excited about the conversation that's about to unfold, I just want to say a few words to kick off the event. So my name's Jake Ferguson. I work for the Black Equity Organisation and the founder of something called Black Men for Change. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. So let me repeat myself. So my name's Jake Ferguson. I work for the newly created Black Equity Organisation, but more importantly, I'm one of the founding guys who set up something called Black Men for Change. And if you don't know much about Black Men for Change, we are a family of black men, professionals, community members who've come together because we realise that working together we have more power and influence. And as you know, in this world, sadly, black people do not have the power and influence we deserve. So it's an opportunity for us to work like a family, a crack team of men who develop strategies, initiatives, and initiatives like this was born out of the fact that we've got Black Men for Change and Black Socks and fantastic organisations like that. Another initiative that came out of Black Men for Change is this building that you're in today. So this is called the IDPAD Centre, and IDPAD, if you don't know, stands for the International Decade for People of African Descent. And for those that are familiar to Hackney, you'll know that there used to be a bookshop called Centerprise on Kingston Road, which was a place where black people and people of all faiths and ethnicities came together to talk about the issues of the day, to gain and share knowledge. But sadly, Centerprise, although it had its heyday in the 80s and 90s, is no more. So actually Hackney, until now, had no centre for black people to come together and organise, which in a borough like Hackney that's always traditionally welcomed black people and people from different countries around the world, it's just a sad state of affairs. So I'm pleased as the vice chair of IDPAD, and I'm here with my colleague Viv, who's the chair, to welcome you to this space. And you'll be seeing a lot more activities like tonight's conversation happening here. It's all about our progress as black people, so we're really interested in tech. How can we use tech to help us progress? How can we use knowledge transfer education programs based here in the future? We've been doing a great season of activities over the summer last year. So people remember the child queue incident. A lot of the community meetings around child queue, the community response to that happened here in this building. We had a summer wealth camp, which Father to Father, where's Courtney? Where is he? There he is, was involved with. And we've had all sorts of things happening here. We have a young people's police monitoring group that meets here to obviously oversee what the police are doing in the borough. So it's going to be a place that will increasingly be putting black people on the map. We're also interested in not just this IDPAD centre in Hackney, developing as an African-focused centre, but also connecting with other centres, Black Cultural Archives, other centres not just in London, but nationally, so that we create a real network of black landmark buildings. Okay, that's part of what we need to do to build our infrastructure and progress going forward. We're about to sign a negotiate a long-term lease, so we're in that early stages of developing what this centre will become. We're talking to a number of corporates. Maybe next time you come here, you might see that the building will have had a bit of an uplift. We recognise that although it's a great building, we haven't got all the tech and infrastructure that we want. But increasingly over the next 2-3 years, you're going to see this place become a real part of not just Hackney, but the nation's infrastructure. So a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over the baton to Viv. So toilets are at the back of the building. There is one actually just at the front, but I think that door's locked at the minute. So we've got ladies and gents toilets, and then there's a disabled toilet as well. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if one does go off, we'll calmly walk out of the front door. Or if there's a fire at the front, we'll walk out the back entrance, which is over there, and out onto the street. So I hope you have a fantastic evening. I'm excited about the debate. I'm a cannabis convert myself. I found it very useful throughout many stages of my life. But it's not about necessarily whether to use cannabis or not. This is about the commercialisation of it. And I think we can learn in the UK from many countries around the world who've taken the brave step of legalisation. So I'm going to hand over, thanks for listening to me, to my colleague Viv. Thank you very much.
Okay, great stuff, great. So I like to describe this event today as a kind of an activator event for us. We held an event not dissimilar to this about, oh God, when was it? No. We had Al Sharpton here 2 weeks ago, but no, I mean the cannabis-related event at the Dawson Junction, so that would have been 2018. 2018, beginning that conversation about what would legalisation and the commodification, legal commodification of cannabis in the UK look like. You know, what part could the communities that have been impacted most by the drugs laws in the UK, how do we make sure that these communities are at the centre of that and any opportunities that might come out of it? And this is a continuation of that conversation. We are having the conversation globally, which is why Kassandra is here, and we will be in New York, where there's a lot happening around legalization and the commercialization or legal commercialization of cannabis, and we'll be over there monitoring how they're progressing. It's their anniversary at the end of this month. It's 2 years so far. That's right, isn't it? And traveling around the States and elsewhere on the planet, looking at what is happening, learning the lessons, and then thinking about how that can be applied in the UK. So that's what I mean when I say this is an activator event. It's another opportunity to connect with individuals and groups that are like-minded, learn, maybe we may have some bits wrong, and ultimately what we want to do is push to ensure that when, not if, but when cannabis is legalised in the UK, it's legalised in a way that's going to be beneficial to those that are often cut out of any opportunities. So that's broadly that. We want to make sure you get as much opportunity as possible to share where you're coming from as individuals and organisations. You might have concerns, or you may have an interest in being in the front seat as well. We have a cannabis event. It's called Cannabis UK at the moment. Nice and clean and simple. On the 26th of September. So again, this event is signposting to that event, and we'll have other events over the next few months, funneling down into that event in September. If you haven't already signed up, we haven't got your details, you've come with somebody else, make sure you're on the mailing list for that information. Again, if you're already in the industry, if you're involved in the health side of it or whatever, and you want to feature in that event, please again, approach us, myself, Sarah at the front, and you've got Alex, you've got Steve, you've got Jane, and other individuals in the room. Who's the other person I wanted to use as a key point? Courtney Brown, there he is, look, hiding, the guy in the suit. All right, so that's the first element of it. We've got, our panelists here, and I want to give them all an opportunity to say a few words, introduce themselves, say a few words, take 5 minutes to do that. And then what we'll do is have the keynote, let the keynote speak, open it up for general conversation, if that makes sense for you guys. I don't want it to be people talking at you for God knows how long, to kind of keep it really simple, and then have that kind of intimate conversation. I'm really excited to know who's in the room and what your journey is and how we can support each other going forward. Does that sound good? Is that acceptable? Yeah. All right, beautiful, beautiful. So I'm not even going to waste my time introducing them. I'm just going to give them the mic and let them take their 5 minutes to do their bit and move that along. Does that make sense? It's easier for me, absolutely. So which end should I start at? Why is he giggling? All right. Round of applause.
First of all, this is the middle, not the end.
Yeah, I just want to throw you off.
Clearly. Hi everyone, my name is IFA Thompson. I am a criminal defence lawyer. I am also a community organiser, so I organise under 2 organisations that I set up. The first one being BLAM UK, that stands for Black Learning Achievement Mental Health, and the second one being Black Protest Legal Support. So in terms of my position and the work that I do and why I'm particularly interested in or advocating for the decriminalisation of cannabis is particularly through my work as a lawyer. So what I often see in the courtroom is the UK's drug policy is actively being used as a weapon to control and criminalise black communities en masse in the UK. And, you know, just the other day, I did a tweet on Twitter after speaking to my friend on Sunday, and he was telling me, he's from Brixton, that's where he grew up, and he was sitting in his car just minding his business as you do in Brixton. And and as he did so, a group of officers came by in a bully van. They came out and they were tapping on his window, saying he needs to open up the car door. He opened the car door. They were like, "Oh, the areas had a lot of criminal activity, so we're literally searching your car because of that." They searched his car. They found nothing. He then asked them to provide a slip as to the reason for the stop and search. Do you know what they said? They said, "We stopped him because his car smelled too good. It had to be masking weed." Yes, yeah. It smelled too good. It was smelling too nice that it had to be masking weed. And mind you, the smell of weed alone, the College Police said you can't use it as a ground to stop somebody. So even the basis of the stop and search is not even allowed. But then they've gone ahead to even create a new false fantasy that your car smelling too nice is even a ground to stop and search you. And these are the ways in which the state weaponizes drug law policies to funnel people into the justice system. Because let's say they found a knife in his car now, or they found something in his car, the fact that the search was unlawful doesn't matter. All that matters is that we found something, we'll prosecute you, and the actual anti-blackness that underpinned the stop and search is overlooked. So with a policy like this, we continually see, even though officers are not supposed to use the smell of cannabis as a ground for stop and search, they use it because they can. And then when they do it, they don't get in trouble in the court system. There's no penalties for racial profiling or racially biased policing. So for me, a move to decriminalise would enable our community to stop being funneled en masse into the justice system. Another thing that I see with a lot of these searches that are happening by the police is that they will find like a bud of cannabis on my client. They will say, okay, well, we're going to take you to court. And off the basis of them being found with a spliff or some cannabis, they then apply for a criminal behaviour order. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with criminal behaviour orders. Literally, they are the worst thing ever. They should be abolished with immediate effect. If you follow me on Twitter, I am completely always ranting about why they need to go. But essentially what they do is they criminalise behaviour that isn't actually on the statute books criminal. So on a criminal behaviour order, they can add something like, you are not to have a grinder, a Rizzler on your persons. And if the police find you with a grinder or a Rizzler, then you are in breach of a court order and could be facing up to 2 years in prison. So it's a way in which they can weaponize the law through one simple stop and search. When they find some cannabis on you, they can weaponize the law and create these really draconian conditions that are not criminal offences in and of themselves, but with the court order, they're allowed to police you in that way. So, Viv is looking at me in a strange way. What's happening?
Your time.
Is it 5 minutes? Okay, well, I'll be back. I'll be back when I'm back.
So, hi everyone, my name's Jane Slater. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive Officer at Transform Drug Policy Foundation. I also run a campaign called Anyone's Child, Families for Safer Drug Control. Transform's a charity, think tank. We call for the legal control and regulation of the drug market. As the IFA has said really accurately, no matter what criteria you look at the Misuse of Drugs Act, which is the UK's drug policy, it's over 50 years old. It has never been subject to government review. We have 50-year-old policy, which is failing on pretty much every indicator, no matter how you look at it. Drug use is at the highest levels. We have a disproportionate stop and search. If you're black in London, you're 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched than if you're white, despite drug use being at very similar rates. We have an escalating drug death crisis. Our prisons are overflowing. And let's face it, the debate in the UK is a little bit behind the rest of the world now. But I do think that's going to flip quickly. Internationally, when you look at it, we have legalization of cannabis in Uruguay, Canada, over 20 US states, and it's about to come to Malta, Germany. And I think what's really interesting there is we've got lots of different models emerging, all who've looked at it in different ways. So in Uruguay, they've got a government monopoly for cannabis. In somewhere like the US, it's a much more corporate model. So I think there is lots of learning and lots of discussion about how can we really start to put social justice in the heart of the cannabis policy. And I think you'll all find that Kassandra, I'm really so happy that she's here today, because I think the New York story is really quite inspiring for us as campaigners to see what can be achieved. Now, I'm not saying we should follow suit directly, and I know you're going to row back on that, but I think looking at it from a UK perspective, a lot of what has been achieved seemed to me to be very optimistic when looking at some of these issues. And I think that really we need to be looking at the whole array of different options of how cannabis legalisation is looking around the world, and really start to have this conversation. How do we create social justice in cannabis policy going forward? And that is exactly why Viv and Black Sox and Transform have formed an allyship to really think. We know that you cannot retrospectively put social justice into cannabis legalisation once it's happened. We need to be having these conversations now. We know these conversations are happening, but if black people aren't at the table, a lot of these issues aren't going to be considered or factored in, and that is why I think our allyship and work going forward is so important, and hopefully we can start to challenge some of that.
Thank you for that. Very succinct. Yeah, love it, love it. Well, let's just invite Kassandra to the top table. Give her a round of applause. Hey. We've got a very conservative audience in this evening.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name's Michael Smith. I'm a master grower. It's hard doing it, but I'm going to give you a little story of how I've become who I am today. I was born in Jamaica, and as you may know, it's aside from America and California, it's the capital of weed. So weed's literally everywhere. We use it as, or should I say, they use it as medicine, tea, herbs, smoke, whatever. So I was always around it. So I was always seeing it, which fascinated me. Over time, I thought, let me look into it. So as I got older, growing up in the UK, we all know it's illegal. Anything to do with it is illegal. So I thought, maybe I can try it on a small scale, learn about it, read about it. I've got friends that do it abroad, so they'll give me knowledge as well. And I'm quite excited to know that it's gonna become legal, as Viv says. So, yeah, I'm gonna keep it short and simple. There's not much to share. I'm gonna let the young lady tell you more about the US and New York's.
Hello, I'm Steve Rolls. I'm also at Transform Drug Policy Foundation. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst. I've done quite a lot of work over the last 20 years on models of regulation, and we've published a book. It's in its 3rd edition on how we think cannabis regulation should work, and it's free online, and I've got some copies here, but if you want to download it and read it online, or just grab me afterwards and be nice to me and I might give you a copy. I've been lucky enough, because of the work that we've done, I've been lucky enough, as the global debate's moved on, we've been invited by governments and civil society organisations around the world to contribute to those global debates. I've been lucky enough to work in Uruguay and actually in Jamaica. And Canada, never in the US. No one ever invites me to the US.
Yeah.
Don't know why. Don't know why. Yeah, they don't, exactly. They know everything in America. But and there's all this exciting stuff happening in Europe now. So there's five European countries are now either have legalized or are in the process of legalizing and regulating cannabis for non-medical use. And it's not just, Thailand. Thailand has legalized cannabis. I mean, and they haven't put any regulations in at all. It's just a complete Wild West. So there's everything around the world, every continent. Australia and New Zealand, it's moving pretty fast. South Africa has legalized cannabis. Mexico has legalized cannabis. Basically, the whole of North America. Colombia is in the process of legalizing cannabis. So it's happening all over the world. There's now nearly 500 million people around the world live in legal cannabis jurisdictions. And there are all these different models, as Jane has said, and there's a lot of lessons to learn. And at some point soon, it's going to happen here too. And so I absolutely agree with Viv and Jane that the window of opportunity for influencing policy is quite small, and it's now. And if we want to build in social justice principles, and if we want to get historically impacted communities involved, if we want to sort of shape that policy, we have to be involved, we have to be part of that discussion, we have to be at the table now. So that's why I'm really pleased at how the allyship between Transform and Black Sox has developed over the last year, and all the positive work we've been doing in these meetings. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from Kassandra, because the work that's been going on in New York is just so remarkable. The spiritual home of the war on drugs is the US. They have been the bullies of the world, and yet kind of almost weirdly, I don't know whether it's weird or not, but it was surprising in some ways, they are also now the pioneers of cannabis legalization regulation, starting in Washington, Colorado, and now 21 states, including New York a couple of years ago. And as that's evolved, we've seen these social justice and social equity principles led by activists and civil society work their way into the laws, and so that is what we need to do here, and that is what we need to learn from. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Kassandra. You don't need to hear anything more from me, but read my book.
Right, I think we should just go straight to the keynote speaker. Give her a round of applause, please. Let's hear. She's got to say, woo! Wee! We had Sharpton over here 2 weeks ago, as we said, and he described himself as a loudmouth from New York, and this is another loudmouth. I was saying to Courtney earlier, I said I've forgotten how assertive she is as a black woman, and I haven't had much sleep for 2 days, and I come and sat down, thought I was going to have a very civilized green tea, and she was all over my stuttering. Jane must have been thinking, what the hell is wrong with Viv? He can't respond quickly enough. But without further ado, please just give her another round of applause and welcome her. Give her a warm welcome to Cold UK. Thank you very much.
Viv, how much time do we have?
You've got 30 minutes.
Oh. All right, let me put that in here. Because it's...
What I've said to the audience whilst you were being interviewed by the Voice newspaper in the room is that, we want to, so everybody's taking 5 minutes, respectfully. We're going to let you speak, and then we're going to open it up for conversation. I'm really interested to know who's in the room. We want as many people in here who are serious to come on the journey with us.
That's right.
And it's a global journey, which I know you're going to get into. So the floor is yours, sister.
Okay, the 30 minutes includes my talking and questions, or just my talking?
You're talking.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the questions.
All right. Where I believe in transparent facilitation. So, yeah, all right, good. All right, so my name is Cassandra Frederique. I am the Executive Director of Drug Policy Alliance. Drug Policy Alliance is a national organization based in the US that works on ending the criminalization associated with drugs. So we work mostly in states and at the federal level to change laws. We also do a ton of public education for people about the drug war and drugs themselves. And we do a lot of partnership and coalition building throughout the country for people that work on drugs, but also people that work on also other social issues. We are starting to, well, actually we are continuing our history, but investing more in our work in honestly taking responsibility and accountability for being the bullies on our terrible drug policies that we have exported throughout the world. And no offense, that the UK has also done and also followed and also, pushed. I told people, I was like, wow, this is my first time coming to the UK. And I've been doing some sightseeing, and I'm like, wow, this is really the land of the original colonizers. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's real here. I'm like, wow, everything is old, very old, right? And, America and the US have a very interesting history. We're like the kid brother. And so it's been interesting to learn about the UK history. I know that I'm being live streamed, and I became executive director 2 years ago. And I'm learning on what it means to be recorded all the time. Because, oh wow, all right. Because I can't say all the things I can say because you're recording me. But I want to be really clear. I came to this conversation. I'm really excited to be here because Black Sox is hosting it. And so I'm going to have a conversation with the Black folks in the room. Because cannabis reform for us is very different. And it has to be different, because we are owed way more. And I think it's really important for Black folks, especially in the UK, to take the leadership role around cannabis reform and broader drug policy. Because no matter what issue or what societal issue we look at, it will always be Black people that are disproportionately impacted, no matter what societal issue. Right? It doesn't matter what we're actually talking about. All it matters is that if Black people are present, they are the people that are catching the most hell. The drug war is no different. Cannabis is the most used substance around the world. And with that comes a need for it to be used as a public education tool, as how the drug war works. My background is that I'm a first-generation Haitian American, so I am also Caribbean. I came to Drug Policy Alliance because I was in the social work school, focusing on how to do social change. And my practicum was as an internship working at Drug Policy Alliance. I didn't know anything about drugs. I didn't know that much about the drug war. Except for the fact that I knew that anytime something was about to be in trouble, that it would be Black people first. When we started the cannabis campaign of reform in 2010, I went around as a community organizer, and I started talking to all the community-based groups. And the conversation was, hey, cannabis arrests are really high in New York. They're terrible. Please sign on to our campaign. Now, why do I start there? Because most drug policy reformers start there. We know that something's wrong with drugs. We know there's something wrong with drug prohibition. And we often go to our partners and say, hey, I know you're working on these other issues, but this issue is really important. So you should sign up. And because I was doing work in New York City, I was going to community-based groups that were that of folks of color, folks that were Black, folks that were Latino, and they were like, listen here, little girl. You want to come here and talk to me about cannabis. 1, people shouldn't be using cannabis. 2, this is a luxury issue. Black people and Latino people have way more things to focus on than to focus on cannabis. This is a waste of time. This is a luxury issue. Get out of my face. I did over 200 one-on-ones with different organizations. They were like, cool, cool, cool. You're here for cannabis, but let me tell you the real reason why black folks are suffering in New York. I had to go back to my boss, who is not black, and be like, listen, are we sure this is what we want to work on? Because as a black person that lives in New York, their issues are pretty important as well. You know, we're talking about issues of housing, issues of education, issues of immigration, issues of public benefits, right? I'm like, man, you know, here I am coming about weed. How many people actually really use weed? Is this really that important? Maybe we should stop being Drug Policy Alliance and be the Housing Policy Alliance, because that seems very serious. And what I realized is that what I was offered was not a challenge of getting people on the issue, but it was an invitation to make my advocacy deeper and to make it more authentic. And the conversation really focused on, in the United States, why would cannabis reform be something that I ask people that are working on broader social justice issues to prioritize? If we're being frank, it's not the most pressing thing harming black folks. It is an important issue. It is one I have spent a lot of time on. But if black people could close their eyes tomorrow, would that be the first issue that you would want? I'm being very honest, as the person that is in charge of a drug policy organization in the US. But I would tell you is that in the US, drug possession arrests are the #1 arrest in the whole country. A majority of them are for cannabis. And what that means is, if you are engaging with law enforcement, or if you are being engaged by law enforcement, there's a strong possibility that it is because of the suspicion or the perception or the evidence of drugs being involved. That is the first thing that I would say. The conversation of cannabis reform, part of the reason why it was so successful in New York, why it became so pervasive, why it sent such a building of power, was because we located cannabis reform in the broader conversation of something that was most pressing for Black New Yorkers, which was their engagement with law enforcement. Cannabis is a policing issue. Divorcing cannabis from policing is a mistake, and it is actually fatal for Black people. We have to recognize that cannabis is often used as an excuse by law enforcement to engage us. It was actually quite fitting that I heard you speak about the smell of the odor of cannabis being used as a reason to stop folks and search folks, because in the US, the odor of cannabis is often used when people are driving to stop the cars. And oftentimes it can be fatal, as it was for Philando Castile, where he was killed in front of his child, or as the excuse that was used to stop Sandra Bland, who was later said to have killed herself in jail. It's also one of the reasons why women, especially cis and trans, are stopped by local law enforcement and often experience sexual assault. Cannabis. Once you start to locate cannabis in the broader experience of being Black in the UK, you'll be able to open up different avenues to talk to other advocates in other issues that get them to see the importance of the issue. Why do I start here? Part of the reason why the New York bill is so exciting is because the New York bill includes ending the practice of the smell of odor as being an excuse to stop cars. The New York bill also is the first place that people can smoke in the street in the US. No other state allows public smoking. Why did we fight for public smoking? Because in 2018, the US federal government passed the provision that people in social housing cannot smoke tobacco products. If they continuously smoke tobacco products and get reported multiple times, they can be evicted from social housing. New York has the largest amount of social housing in the US. One of the most significant places where people could be arrested for cannabis in New York State was in social housing. So if we legalize cannabis, but people could not smoke in their apartments, and could not smoke in the street, then we would have just made it more convenient for the people that were not getting arrested in the first place to access cannabis, and the people that were most criminalized to continue being a criminalized state. Cannabis became housing policy. Cannabis is also one of the #1 reasons why people lose custody of their children. In New York, the legislation worked to strip that power. Cannabis just became child welfare policy. In the United States, cannabis is the #4 reason why someone is deported. For people that are without status and even legal permanent residents, people that have green cards. We worked with immigration allies to figure out how could we reduce the risk of that, especially as we moved forward on creating pardon policies or expungement, so that our immigration policy and our criminal justice policy around records worked in conjunction to reduce the risk of deportation and inadmissibility. Cannabis became immigration policy. The biggest thing that we learned in doing the one-on-one policies, and what you see reflected in New York policy, is the way that we looked at the comprehensive nature of the damage of cannabis reform and made repair the central piece of cannabis legislation in New York. This thing, and that strategy means that it is going to disproportionately impact, the hope is that it will disproportionately impact Black people. Because it is Black people that are getting evicted, it is Black people that are getting deported, it is Black people that are getting their kids taken away. And it is Black people that are consistently in the situation where they're having to deal with law enforcement in their neighborhoods. Cannabis policy for Black people is about power building. If Black people do not build more power through cannabis advocacy, then it's not cannabis reform that serves Black people. We got different Black people that work in different issue areas talking about drug policy reform, not as drug policy reform, but as a broader issue of social power for Black people in New York State. This is one of the most critical lessons of cannabis reform policies that New York can offer others. How do we see the damage, see the harms, and create our policies associated with that? How do we, it's not just about not getting arrested for cannabis, it's about forcing decision makers to have to account and be accountable to Black communities in that state. One of the things so repair was a huge issue and a huge tenet of how we built cannabis policy in New York. And it is one that I would offer is such a critical piece for the conversation for Black folks in the UK to consider as you're thinking about what is really important. I am often asked to come speak about cannabis reform through an economic justice lens. How do we make sure Black people get the money? I'm gonna let you know something. We haven't figured it out yet. Not because we haven't tried, but because capitalism is capitalism. It is a white structure. What we have done is change the conversation in New York about who is supposed to benefit for cannabis reform. And we did that because we made it about power building. So if you listen to elected officials across the state in New York, everybody talks about racial equity. Everybody talks about social equity. Everybody talks about the fact that cannabis reform has to impact the communities most impacted. So when we built the conversation in New York about cannabis reform, the conversation was about repair, but it was also about the structure of the industry. The biggest thing that I think is really important for folks as they look at cannabis reform in the UK, is making sure that you prevent as much as possible corporate capture. there are US and Canadian companies that are already talking to your elected officials about how they should regulate and create the structure. It is super critical for people in the UK to be very clear that people in the UK have to create the regulations and disproportionately benefit from whatever the regulatory system is in the UK. And in that conversation, part of the thing that is really critical, and one of the things that we did through issuing several reports, was by talking about who needs to benefit from the cannabis industry in running it and also in creating it. And in New York, we focus primarily on the people that were arrested for cannabis. Who has been arrested for cannabis? Who has been stopped for cannabis? Who has been harmed for cannabis? And in New York, they are moving through the regulatory process right now. And the first licenses in New York, the conditional adult use regulatory dispensary license, is for anyone who had a marijuana conviction and 2 years of business experience. So the first licenses are going to people who got arrested for cannabis. The people that are able to grow cannabis in New York are New York farmers. So that means we have blocked people from California and Colorado and Nevada and Oregon from importing their cannabis to be in retail. It is people in New York, farmers in New York, that are going to be growing their cannabis. So for you, who identifies as a master grower, he should be at the front of the line. Right? Because if you're supplying the people now, why wouldn't you supply the people later? And that's part of the thing that's super critical. I mean, there are multiple differences between the UK and cannabis. I mean, UK and the US, right? In the US, different states that have medical programs, those medical companies set up and wait for adult use and then basically say, you don't have to find other people, we can supply it. But that's because the US doesn't believe in healthcare, right? You guys have your medical system into the healthcare system, so that's different. But it's super critical for you to talk about it now, because what blocks you from you supplying some of the medical stuff that's happening in the UK? Like, do you concede that the medical cannabis fight is already over? How quickly can you start acculturating the community to the conversation of the industry that's already here? So when we also talked about it, is also corporate capture is something that we really need to focus on, because if corporations take over, we know Black people lose, right? So what does it look like for small grows? What does it look like for micro licenses? What does it look like for nonprofits? One of the first licenses that's operational in New York is also Housing Works Cannabis Corp., which is a nonprofit that focuses primarily on serving people with HIV and AIDS and formerly incarcerated people. Again, people that have been the pillars of cannabis reform in the country of the US, because people with HIV and AIDS have used cannabis for a very long time to deal with pain management as well as appetite. How do we get the people that have been building the informal economy infrastructure at the front of the line? What are we doing to incentivize people that are part of informal economies to be a part of the formal economy? And how do we acknowledge the fact that some people are in the informal economy because they are shut out of the formal economy? And so, one of the things that is, I want to be really clear, it's not like I'm a very popular person in New York for the people that are part of the legacy market, right? They're like, you have just regulated something that I have been feeding my family on for a really long time. And that is a hard thing. And it's figuring out, like, how do you incentivize people to be a part of the regulated market? How do you reduce the barriers for them to not have to jump through 50 million hoops to actually be in there? What are the conversations you can be having with people right now in the informal economy about what regulations would benefit them? They are the people that we should be having a conversation with now to figure out what are the conditions that they need. Is it capital? Is it real estate? Is it partnership? What does that look like? The last thing that I would say about the things that we really focused on was, where does the tax revenue go? Now, this was critical in New York because it's the thing that we often blocked when legislation was being put forward and people wanted to move it forward. We said, listen, if the money doesn't come back to communities that were disproportionately impacted by enforcement, we're not going to be okay with this bill. So what we did was, in the New York legislation, 40% of the tax revenue has to go back to communities that have been disproportionately impacted through grant. You know, the park that doesn't have lights, that money has to go to that. You know, the schools that don't have real new books, that money has to go to that. How do we make sure, goes back to power building, how do we make sure that cannabis reform actually strengthens our communities, right? Because cannabis enforcement has weakened our communities. It has taken us out of our community, it has criminalized us, it has dehumanized us, it has made the question of our dignity, made our dignity a question. And the thing that I will say that is super critical in New York, in part of the work that we did, was really understanding that, you know, something that Steve said is like the window of opportunity. And I think that that is true. And I also think for Black people, sometimes there's no window. There might be a window for everyone else, but no window for us. And sometimes the window, when we're thinking about the window of opportunity, we have this conversation like, who's on the other side? Is there someone that's gonna help us? Sometimes we think about elected officials, right? And we're like, oh, this MP, they're great. I've heard them talk about drug policy and they're gonna help us and it's gonna be easier. And then we're disappointed, right? Because they don't actually do it. Or they crack it open a little bit, but not really for us to actually move something through. And so what I would say to Black UK folks, I don't know what to call y'all, Black Britonians? Is that what to call it? Is that what it is? Black UKians? Black Brits? Okay, thank you. Black Brits, thank you. UKians, I don't know where I got that, y'all. Is that sometimes you make the window, sometimes you break the window, sometimes you push that window up further than they want you to. Don't wait for the window. No matter what, listen, if the white people are already talking about cannabis, we're behind. You hear me? If the white people are already talking about cannabis, we're behind. But it's not lost. And you can jump the line. You hear what I'm saying? Because we jumped the line. There were a lot of people that were talking about cannabis in New York for 30 years. None of them looked like me. But when the bell rang, when the punches were being thrown, we were in the ring. Punching, pushing, fighting, biting, spitting, kicking, stomping them out. Because we should have no mercy in doing cannabis reform, in doing drug policy reform, because they've not shown us mercy. The thing that's really interesting to me about being here for the last couple of days is y'all seem very posh, very civil, right? I come into the rooms, the reason why the New Yorkers are so loudmouth is because, you know, we dropping F-bombs here, dropping F-bombs there, rolling our eyes, slapping, making noise. Y'all, not only are they beating Black Brits butts here, they're beating Black Brit butts in the countries y'all are from. Them white boys are running Jamaica policy on cannabis, running circles. They're in Africa right now buying land. Okay? And black people want to have a conversation like, cannabis reform. You know, maybe they're going to our countries, buying land in front of the water, giving money in the elected officials. And then here, we're having a conversation about cannabis. And we're like, oh, what should New York do? I don't care what New York did. What do y'all want to do? Right? This is not about adopting the New York model. The thing about New York was that we refused to do what other states did. Refused to do what we do that doesn't work for you. What is it that black Brits want out of cannabis? What I'm saying is use cannabis as a way to build your broader power. What is the stuff that you actually want? How do you use cannabis as a missive to actually build the infrastructure and the political awareness? Because the thing is, there are people in power here that want cannabis. And how do you, as black Brits, stand in between what they want and what you need? This is a political fight. Cannabis is political. They will tell you that it shouldn't be political. It's an economic issue. It's a legislative issue. It's a criminal justice issue. Black is political, no matter what. Your arrests are political. So the regulation is political. We made it about politics. We made it about narrative. We made it about culture. We made it about history. It was also about cannabis, but it was primarily about those things and flexing the power and leveraging the conversation and building a infrastructure that made it so that when they put something in front of us that was no longer acceptable to us, that we walked away. We walked away multiple times for cannabis reform in New York. We walked away in 2013. We walked away in 2015. We walked away in 2018. We walked away in 2019. And we won in 2021. Do not give up anything. Do not concede. The world wants cannabis regulation. And it is critical because we know in most communities, if black people are present, we are the people that are being enforced upon the most. Make cannabis black, period.
Just give Kassandra another round of applause, please. Come on. I feel sedated. I could have sat and listened to you for another half an hour or more. And it's humbling as well because I realize that we're not doing enough, nowhere near enough, and that's humbling. And to an extent, it's also disempowering, which is, you know, I have to go away and meditate on that one. But definitely, as I was listening to you, I was thinking, finding excuses as to why we're not going to be able to achieve the same thing. Oh, there's not enough of us here, and we're not unified and all the rest. But I'm not an apologist. So I know when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to be fired up. And we're going to be looking to pull ourselves together in the UK. And even more importantly, redoubling on our allyship, yourself, others in the UK, in the United States, in Africa, and the Caribbean and elsewhere, which I know you're very much in favour of. Can you just say a few things about the global fight? Because I think that's important for us. There's only, I will say to people, as far as the UK is concerned, there's only 8 of us here. You know, most Americans say, oh really, you got the black people in the UK? And it does feel like that sometimes. There are only 8 of us. So just talk to us about the broader family and how that's playing out. Is that all right before I open it up for questions? Sorry, I can't hear you. Yeah, thank you.
So one, I will say to the first thing that you said, Black people weren't with us in the beginning of the fight either. Cannabis was very much like a white boy issue. So nothing that I'm saying here I'm offering as like you're not doing enough. Where I see you all at is where we were in 2009 and 2010. It didn't start that way. If you look at the laws that passed in the US in 2012, it doesn't reflect that because that wasn't the conversation. It is through the building that has happened nationally that you have seen laws start shifting in 2016 and 18 and 20 and 21 and 22. What I'm offering is a roadmap. It might not work the same. But the thing I want to impress is that you're not already behind. Like you're at the beginning, you're where we were. And it'll probably take you less than 10 years. I think one of the things for the global conversation, one of the things that we are trying to figure out is the conversation of the federal implications of United States cannabis regulation. The US has not legalized cannabis at the federal level yet. And at the federal level, we'll have the most international implications. Because currently we are legalizing at our provincial level, like our different states. And the federal government has ignored it for a really long time. They're kind of like, oh God, there's another state. And now you'll see, as you heard a few months ago, the president of the United States is like, no one should be arrested for cannabis. I'm gonna pardon people. I'm gonna look at the scheduling. But that will strike off a bunch of international implications because the US is already in violation of international treaties because some of us have already legalized cannabis. In the global conversation, I think one of the things that's really important, and I think one of the things that Black Brits have the opportunity is to really build out the international conversation here in Britain as well as in the Caribbean as in Africa, right? So what is the information that you're sending home and working with local organizers in those places to make sure that they're paying attention to the stuff that you're navigating and also that you're building power across? Because that's one of the things that has been most frustrating is seeing pictures of companies that are already operational going to these other places and basically setting up shop and are waiting for legalization to pass so that they can take control, right? And, you know, one of the things that I think is also important about our global community is sometimes we think that those with the most resources are the smartest people when it comes to setting things up. And I think that we as like Black diaspora folks should be in conversation with our partners and our colleagues in other countries to say that we are the resource, right? That we are also the resource with them and that we actually need to fight on multiple fronts. And so we've been in conversation with the cannabis community is having conversation globally around what are the things that we have to look for, what are the things that we have to block, what are the ways that we can shrink the power of the corporations that are basically running different governments on cannabis reform, and calling out bad actors. And I think more than the US, y'all have an opportunity to really push that. And I think we're really open to building the conversation of like the global Black cannabis community.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, well look, let me open it up. We've all been very patient and very, what do you describe us as? Civilized. Yeah. Very, very civilized. Posh. So let me just we'll push the mic around if that's all right, and allow people to have their say. I don't mind if you make a statement. Just please keep it succinct, but just try and get more questions. Yeah, I'm gonna send the mic around. That's all right. It's all right. Be eager. That's what Cassandra wants. I'm gonna push the mic around. If I get someone to assist in circulating, Akil. All right. So let's see the first hand, sir. Yourself. Oh, you were stretch it. yourself if you
So
can.
sorry, that was incredibly rude of me.
That's all right.
Which we
It's not an
British
obligation.
tend. Sorry,
You wanna
which we
remain
British
anonymous,
tend not
that's
to
all
be.
fine.
Yeah, we try not to be impolite. Firstly, my name's Judith Nepshall. I'm the founder of From Me to You. We are a black charity that deals with providing support to the black community. We started a couple of years ago because I got a terminal diagnosis of cancer in 2018 and was given a year to live. And on my journey, I found that there were massive healthcare inequalities in relation to black people. I was quite surprised, and that's where we started from. And actually, while I'm saying this, I'm going to say something to you. Somebody said that they were disheartened that maybe we weren't doing enough. I want to put it to you that 2 years ago, I started my charity or the group in my sitting room, and it was me and my daughter, and we were by ourselves. Today we got funded, and we got the second largest amount from one of the biggest charities in the UK for funding to a grassroots organisation. So I'm really inspired to see you here because I think we are ready.
That's right.
I think what we lack possibly is the people who I hope are in this room to give us the vision and that roadmap which you've just given us. And I think now is definitely the time, not tomorrow, not yesterday, but today, because we're ready. So I thank you for coming over here. But one of the biggest questions I had to ask you, in New York, I mean, because you're powerful all by yourself, but I'm assuming that you had people in the room behind you. And what I find in the UK, why I'm a little bit disheartened, not that I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, because it will happen, but what disheartens me is that you had people in the room with you. And in the UK, I'm not saying that there aren't people in the room that can make that happen, but they're invisible to the vast majority of our community. And I don't know how you did that without people taking their position, so to speak. And what would you say in relation to that? Have we got the people here to take that position and lead? Because that's what's needed, really. Thank you.
I'm really excited to hear, because I do agree with you that the time is now and that y'all have everything that you need. All the materials are here. I was not by myself at all in any way. And in fact, sometimes I was behind people, or people more likely who were standing arm to arm. And I think one of the things is really building. This campaign took 10 years. Right? It wasn't 1 year we decided to do this, and we had multiple campaigns as this stuff was going. As I mentioned before, we were all building, we worked on multiple campaigns together to build the level of trust so nobody could peel us off. So we worked on the campaign around Stop and Search for like at least 7 years together. We worked on campaigns for decriminalization solely. We worked on campaigns around record sealing. And one of the biggest things about cannabis reformers was that we showed up for other fights. And that was critical in building durable relationships. We showed up for people who were working on solitary confinement, because most people don't realize that one of the main reasons why people get solitary confinement in New York is for drug possession, and most of that possession is cannabis, right? And so we started showing up to solitary and confinement fights, so then they showed up for the cannabis fight, right? And so I think that that's one of the ways, is showing up for each other, and showing up in other fights that have nothing to do with cannabis, but have everything to do with the same populations that are being enforced upon on cannabis. And then I just want to say, I'm really happy you're still here.
I think the other point you made about whether or not the leadership is in the room, and this is what we're going to find out this evening, and we're inviting people to sign up for the journey ahead. We've got a major landmark event in September. We are going to the States in April to continue to build those relationships globally, and we are going elsewhere. I'll be in Uganda in May as well. I think you're right in that there is definitely more fragmentation in the UK because there's so few of us, and we lose leadership because when strong leadership comes to the fore, it's like everybody gets on top of that, one individual or few individuals. It's a lot of space to cover, a lot of issues to cover with too few people. And that's why I think, and it's important through organisations, networks like infrastructure networks like Black Men for Change and others, Black Socks, in allyship with entitled mainstream white organisations, begin to build out that infrastructure, that underpinning and resilience, so that the leadership is broad, not centred around one or two key individuals, because it's easy for those individuals to then be taken out or burn out. So let me take another question.
Hi, Cassandra. My name is Jake Ferguson. I'm the founder of Black Men for Change, and I'm an advisor to them now. I also helped set up something called the Baobab Foundation, which is investing in black communities across country. I want to congratulate Sister over there for your award. I'm sure you will make that money, turn that money into millions. So best of luck with all you're doing. Cassandra, I first heard about you in the film The Grass is Greener, and it really broke down into very simple terms why cannabis was made illegal in the first place in the States. And I didn't realise that, the connection with jazz and the white fear that these angry black stoned men were going to take their women away. Fast forward to, you mentioned you said no in 2016, no in 2018, and then it was 2021 when you finally succeeded. My first question is, what were you saying no to, and how were you able to say no? What power did you have? And then my second question is sort of more about the fact that I would imagine there will be a large proportion of the black community who will be very scared about the idea of legalisation, because frankly they've faced the trauma of the state using cannabis as a weaponized tool, as Ife and yourself have explained. So what are the clever ways that you think some of our skeptics within the black community can be turned? Is it the argument about social policy which you so eloquently set out, or is it something more spiritual? I don't know. It'd be really good to hear some of your top tips for how those of us who are working in the civil rights space can use your debate so well to influence others. Thank you.
Thank you. I would say some of the stuff that worked for us was focusing on the faith community around policing. The faith community was, Reverend Al was one of the faith leaders that we worked with around stop and search policy. So really getting people to get faith and moral leaders to recognize and be public about how law enforcement is being used against the community to really start taking up space and building part of that narrative. We were a part of a coalition called Communities United for Police Reform, and it was groups that were across issue area that were focusing on ending stop and frisk. There were tons of reports that we issued that looked at different neighborhoods, the racial disparities, the age of people. And we found that going into communities and talking about what does a cannabis arrest look like. In New York, one of the things that we often articulated to folks was that cannabis was already decriminalized in New York in 1977. Possession of it should have only been a $100 ticket. However, if cannabis was in plain view or if it was burning, that was an arrestable misdemeanor. And most of the time when we talk to Black folks of distinction or power or elders, my parents were like, well, you wouldn't get in trouble if you didn't have cannabis, right? Like, that's how you stay out of trouble. And we had to really enforce upon them that in New York, the way that people were getting arrested for cannabis was that law enforcement was tricking them. So basically, law enforcement would stop someone, search them, pull the cannabis out of their pocket. In the pocket is a ticket. Out of the pocket is an arrest, and they would arrest them. So they would essentially entrap them. And that sense of fairness really got people upset. because I was like, this practice is a targeting, right? And then we started talking about the racial disparity. It was like, well, why is it okay for that kid to possess, but not okay for our kids to possess? And look what happens when they trap our kids and all the things that happen afterwards. And when you start getting moral leaders to start questioning their idea of morality around the practice, then you create space where, where for us it was like, well, I really don't like that they had cannabis, but I think it's actually more messed up as to how this is happening. And so really unpacking the process of what's happening for arrest to happen, really unpacking the process as to what happens when someone gets an arrest, how it impedes them from being a full participant in society, then starts going to this broader issue that people can attest to. So then it's not about cannabis per se, but it's about the act of fairness. And for us, for faith leaders, we found faith leaders that supported us, that brought other faith leaders across. And that's one thing that we can also offer in support of y'all, is the faith leaders that we've been working with to kind of play that role and do that deep kind of education. Because, there's some faith leaders that are still calling it the devil's lettuce, right? And so it's really important that we start demystifying that, and we found the faith community to be super important. But again, going back to, I think, our biggest allies were the police reform folks, especially with the momentum and the conversation now. It's very different than when we started in 2010, right? Like, if you're having a conversation about policing in 2023, people have visualizations about how wrong it can get and how messed up it can be. And so that was super important for us in turning people into the issue and recognizing the broad base of it, and like really building conversations about policing solely, and then adding these other issues, I think was super helpful for us. And then I think social policy is critical. Like, do we really think that arresting someone for cannabis, impeding them from getting basic needs, right? Like impeding someone's ability to get a job, like these are things that people can have conversations like, oh, this happens to someone when they were like 17, 18 years old. They're now 35. Do we really think that that's something that should happen? Like, is that part of great society? And I think these issues of like cannabis arrests are also super normative. People think that this is always what happened and it has to be that way, but people have shifted policy, right? And so therefore we can shift it back or we can get rid of it. And so that's one of the things that I think is super critical as we build the campaign and the global conversation.
Thank you, my dear. Do you want to add to that, Jane? Observational as an ally.
No, I mean, I think it's really interesting about the church voice, and it is definitely an area that Transform has increasingly been looking at, because I think there is a big moral objection to changing any drug policy law. It comes down to this quite moral, fuzzy emotional response, and it means that people can't look at the evidence around it. And I think that's a strategy we're really keen to look at in the UK, and a bit started some work around, and I think that is an important direction to go in. Right, there's my immediate reflection.
Thank you. So just, and if you want to talk about the economics of it, feel free to do so. I know there's been a lot of emphasis on the policy side, but there are individuals who are interested in the money dimension of it, which is part of the repair dimension. So do feel free to talk about money if that's where your head is at, please.
Thank you. Hi.
Let me just pause a minute. Let me check the time, because I know it's the middle of the week for a lot of us. All right, cool. So I'm going to take a couple more questions. So please don't hang back if you think you've got something that you want to know. You need to not be backwards in coming forwards. It's all right. I'm not looking at anyone in particular.
Hello. My name's Tanya. I founded a platform called Plants and Powers. I've been doing it on my own so far. It's kind of the beginning stages, but we've done 4 events so far. And the last event we did, we had a group, they're called Can Card, I don't know if you're aware of them. They are now doing training sessions with the police to train them on how they can like approach people differently, and how that can be broken down. But I guess knowing CanCard and educating the police, it's who is educating them, and at the moment the people that are educating them are coming from white people. So although we are making those steps, I guess it's how we can get black people into those spaces that are already being made. And yeah, I just wanted to say it was really empowering and inspiring to listen to you. I think I've felt quite confused in where I want to stand in the cannabis fight in the UK, because a lot of people I've been exposed to so far are what you're explaining as like the corporate white male, which I don't want to support. So I guess it's just finding the alliance amongst people and yeah, just keep fighting.
And let's make sure we join up, everyone who's here today, make sure we join together and continue the conversation, because ultimately that's what it's about. It's a free session, but obviously it's cost something to put it on. And we're investing because we want to get the mobilisation that Kassandra and others have been talking about this evening. I'm just roll back to Steve, maybe around the policing side of it briefly, if you want to say something, Steve, is that all right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's strange in the UK that there's this big void of leadership from Westminster. There's no, if anything is going to happen, it is going to be a bottom-up process. Almost all of the advances that have been made in drug policy in the UK historically have been led by local initiatives and community groups. And interestingly, some of the interesting work that's happening in the UK has been initiated by local police, not police leadership, but by local police around decriminalisation initiatives and some sort of innovative public health responses. But yeah, there's clearly a huge need for engagement and education of police, and it's not going to come from me, white, privileged, middle class individual. But there is openness to it, and white dominated organisations can evolve if there is dialogue. So that does need to happen. I mean, Transform's positions evolve. We've learned from what's been happening in the US. The third edition of our book has got a chapter on a social equity program. It's got a chapter on expungement. It's got a chapter on corporate capture. It didn't when it was first published in 2013, because we've learned from what's been going along, and we've been, we've through our allyship and conversations with Black Sox, we can provide certain, technical support or access to political capital and so on, but we can't do that stuff. But having those dialogues, getting in the space, educating police, educating other audiences, working with finding champions, faith communities, definitely a huge potential within the UK and presumably within the black community in particular.
Excuse me, do you endorse, because a lot of this is about training and education, because I forgot the name of the organisation.
Can I stop? Sorry, do you mind if I pause you 1 minute? I'm going to come back to you.
So sorry.
Sorry. I just wanted to hear from Blam, because Blam does a lot of work on the ground, grassroots work, a lot of training, advocacy stuff. If this is something you think you could expand into as part of the network.
Well, I'm an abolitionist. I don't believe the police should exist. And the police remain very harmful to black communities, and I feel as though when we use the word training, it kind of demystifies the horrors and the violence police inflict on our communities. I think the drugs policy needs to be changed, and it needs to be that cannabis is decriminalised at first instance. I don't think the police should be allowed to continue to get away with racist stop and search, and I feel like if we're just doing it as training and unconscious bias, that allows that to continue, and that's just not the reality. So for me and the work that we do, because we're abolitionists, we don't engage with the police, but other organisations that would like to do so, for free. But as for my stance and the way that we move as an organisation, that wouldn't really work.
Thank you for that. I would also say we focused on doing Know Your Rights with people. Right, really doing Know Your Rights with communities. So that was another way that we built with folks, is that we went to schools, we went to churches, we went to community places, and we told people, like, this is what the law is, this is what you can do, this is how you keep yourself safe. And really figuring out, because the power you want to build is that of the community. You don't want to strengthen the institution of policing, right? Strengthening the institution of policing only makes the lives of Black people more dangerous, right? We want to have a conversation about how our communities can build the infrastructure for community safety. How are we keeping ourselves safe? How are we building our own social norms about how we deal with harm, how we deal with drugs, how we deal with certain things? And so one of the strategies that we used very early on is, like, between like 2010 and 2013, 2014, we were doing Know Your Rights trainings throughout the state. And really talking to people and getting people to understand. It was also another great public education tool.
Great stuff. So I can take your question succinctly, because I'm only going to take a few and I want as many people as possible to.
Feel free to go on. I
No,
agree.
no, you've got the mic. Go ahead.
Feel free to go on, because obviously
You've got the mic, sis. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree to a certain extent, but I'm not going to go in that tonight. But to a certain extent, I disagree as well. But I don't think now's the time and place. Maybe afterwards we'll catch up and have that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Nothing like healthy disagreement. We'll take this young man here, you, sir, the young lady at the back, and then the brother here. All right, you're not stretching now, are you? All right, good, good, good.
Good evening, Cassandra. My name's Joe Calvin. I'm a SEND specialist. I work at a special needs school just around the corner as a special needs teacher. Also, I'm a board member of OMA, Only Minds Alliance, which is to do with mental health. What I would like to discuss about, and the angle that I loved, and how you built your story and narrative from the beginning of, I don't really associate to this, to realizing the impact and power of driving policy change. And now that we're talking about education, and from my experience, I got a lot of kids in my school that have epilepsy. Now, throughout the NHS, they take loads of medications, and parents have given me permission to administer them medications that they take on a regular basis, and it has more adverse side effects than it actually helps them. Now, one child in particular, I won't say any names, his parents got CBD oil, and that stopped completely his epileptic seizures. And I know there was also a case with a 5-year-old as well. It was a white woman as well who got a lot of press in the UK press for that as well, and then they actually gave her an exempt. So for me, I'm all about throwing my hat in the ring and say, well, I'll put myself forward. I'll help to raise more awareness, to raise more knowledge, to spread that education, to educate children that's also impacted, like with Child Q in Hackney as well, and see what can we do now to preempt that, to stop that from happening ever again. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say and contribute. Yeah.
I'm going to pause that, take that as a statement, and give him a round of applause. Serious looking young man over there. And then the panel can pick up on those points.
Hello, my name's Sol. My question is for Cassandra. I wanted to know, do you have any advice for someone like Michael, how he can best prepare for and take the step forward when the time's right to go from, as you called it, the informal market to the formal market?
We'll take one more question and then we'll bring it all back to the panel. Thank you, sir. Nice and succinct.
Hi, I'm Paula Bryan, and I'm the founder of Carers for Carers, a social enterprise specialising in the wellbeing of unpaid carers, and we mainly work with carers from the African and Caribbean heritage communities, and I'm also a board member for OMA. In the UK, currently, there are about 500,000 black carers, and I say this is underestimation because most of us just don't identify as being caregivers. We're just doing it for our families because, you know, they need that love and support, and we're missing out. And we're facing health inequalities and every type of inequality you can imagine. Now, recently, I've been finding out about cannabis caregivers in the US. And I know that in New York, you have like business owners and individuals can become cannabis caregivers. So my question to you really is, how can black carers harness this? You know, how can we become a part of that conversation and ensure that, you know, we can help our community as well?
Beautiful. So let's three to summarise. That's nice. We've got young people. All right. I'm broadening it, obviously. We remember it. We've got how do we support the individuals, entrepreneurs over here? How do we get that mentoring, coaching dimension, and then the whole carer element, which links back to the health sector that you referred to before. So I'll let you. I'm not wanting you to carry the full weight, Cassandra. You take the first one, but we'll open it out that way as well. All right, so you, then Michael, and then we'll come back this way.
I think the thing about caregivers that's super critical is that cannabis is also a wellness product, and there's also a health product, and I think there's an opportunity here for folks to talk about Black health and cannabis and really center that in the conversations that you're having as a way to also like get more people, because a lot of people don't know about the health benefits that cannabis can play for young people with epilepsy, the pain management associated with cancer, the conversations around HIV and AIDS. There's a lot of information about medical cannabis and the ways that you can use it in different ways. And I think centering the conversation around cannabis and Black wellness and Black health equity is a way for caregivers to be another voice in the conversation for cannabis reform, and figuring out how from the front end you can bring Black wellness into the conversation in Black health. Because oftentimes people talk about the money, but health is wealth, and how can we use cannabis and the properties and the ways that you can use it to build out different healthcare options for folks to be a part of it. I think there are multiple groups around the world that talk about medical cannabis and patient rights and caregiver rights and how to build the infrastructure. One of the things that we're really struggling with in the US is that oftentimes when adult use goes into play, the medical programs suffer. And that's because both of it comes through the business. They're both businesses, right? As opposed to here where your medical is in the healthcare system. But I think there's some conversation here about how do you include the conversation of health, especially the cannabis in young kids was one of the biggest mainstreaming things that happened in the US. There was a conversation about Charlotte's Web and CBD oil. It was on our version of BBC, which is CNN, and the searches on Google went up tremendously. There are more states in the US that have medical cannabis programs than have adult use in the country, and that's usually how we open the door in some of the most conservative states. Is also another way to build out populations, to build support for cannabis, is like, who are the people that would benefit from access to cannabis for health reasons? Who are people that can't access it through NHS that might be easier to access it through a regulated system, and how do you bring them on into the conversation? I think for caregivers, I think one of the things that's also important is that overregulation can be something, and they put too many requirements for people to become caregivers for cannabis because of the controlled substance version of it. And so I think it's critical as you're building the policy to build a health equity infrastructure and angle into the way that you build cannabis reform.
Hold on to that. How does your advanced network and experience, how can that be utilized to support the Michaels in the UK? Is that fair?
And you're Michael. Okay, I was like, well, who's Michael? We'll see. Again, I don't want to pretend like we figured that out, right? We are struggling with figuring out how to get the Michaels in the world in the regulated system, and figuring out what the incentives are for the Michaels to think that even the regulatory system is attractive, right? It's very costly. The taxes are very high. But there's a lot of conversation and organizations in the US that are about supporting the legacy markets. That's what we call them. I would implore y'all to not let people use the word black market to describe people that are currently in the industry. It's a racist term, and it only reinforces stigma. And so we call it the legacy market because it also implies like, this is the market that is serving Brits right now. And there's no stigma associated with it because Brits are buying it, right? Brits of all walks are buying it. So the legacy market, I think we're still trying to figure out how do you build a regulatory system that makes it easy for people to transition. Because currently it's hard for people to transition because to be in the formalized economy, you need a lot of capital. And I think there are opportunities here for, as we try to center, what does regulation look like? And, I don't know if Transform wants to speak to this some more. Like, what are the barriers that we can do to try to move things in? How can the people that are in the legacy market now potentially start having conversations about what regulations should look like in the UK? I think if we could do something different, we would have probably talked to the legacy market to ask them what regulation could look like, and what would be their incentives to go into a regulated market. I think we created regulations and we created conversations and then came to legacy growers and we're like, see how great this is? And they were like, nah, this does not work for me, right? And then now we're trying to figure it out and be like, please come into the market. But I think it's important for legacy growers now to figure out what do they want and to have open conversations with drug policy reformers that are actually writing the policy to figure out what is possible.
Thank you. Transforms fighting over the mic.
No, well, I mean, the experience in Canada was that the barriers to entry for new businesses were just way too high, and so for small businesses, it was very, very difficult to get started. You had to have your entire grow set up. And it was very strictly regulated what you had to do. It was going to cost you like $100,000 to even get, and that was before you could apply for a license, which you might not even get. So so you obviously have to, for small and medium-sized businesses, you have to make sure the barriers to entry are not too high. But you can also use, in Massachusetts, for example, they provide some of the tax revenue is used to provide interest-free loans, credit, even grants in some cases, and training. So you can get training in horticulture. That could be an opportunity for you to do some training as well, and which you obviously don't need yourself. He's obviously a master grower. Doesn't need any training at all. But they also do training in business, running a business, and some of the other technical stuff. So there's opportunities there, and then you can use your licensing in your regulatory system to, as has happened in New York, or I think the 30 or whatever it is, 30, 40 first licenses all went to equity candidates. So you can use your licenses both to preference certain groups from impacted communities or whatever your social justice goals are. And you can use it to prevent corporate capture by saying you can't have more than X number of licenses. You can't have X number of acres of growing. So you can prevent monopolization and consolidation and oligopolies and corporate takeover of the industry using your licenses. These are all things that can be built into and hardwired into the regulatory system at the beginning, but they've tried to sort of retrospectively put some of that stuff into the system in Canada, and it's really, really difficult. It's really important that it happens at the start, and that those goals are hardwired into the regulatory system and infrastructure.
I would also say, the thing that's really hard about the funds is that the funds are reliant on the tax revenue after the industry starts, and so I think there's also a conversation about angel investors in the Black community, folks that are doing economic justice work, folks that are doing investing, folks that are doing business. Like, what are the possibilities now to start pooling money so that you don't have to wait for tax revenues to be able to give people loans? Like, is there community banking? Is there stuff that folks can be doing in the community, creating economic engines or revenue sources, so that when Master Grower Michael comes and says, hey, I have a license, but I need support, like, can we do our own version of community banking to be able to set them up, and so that you're not reliant on the state's like 5-year promise that they'll give you a loan when everybody else who already has capital is already in. Like, in this moment when you have not started yet, can you start building the fund community-wide so that when licenses are open, our entrepreneurs have access to resources to be able to jump right in?
Thank you. All right, well, look, I'm going to take one more question. Oh, did you have a, you did have a,
I've got another one, I'll keep it brief.
That's the last question of the evening, people, so.
Yeah, so I think, just to touch on your earlier point, the people here, we're not really posh like that, but you know, like you ain't seen us at Carnival or anything like that. But anyway, let me get to the point. So I think in this country, I'll try and keep us succinct, but the racism that we deal with in this country as black people, it's been intergenerational, and I think what it does is it makes generations get wearier as they get a little bit older, and it just feels like nothing's changing. You know, we've never really been represented in a meaningful way in the politics here. So I think the people who have the most spirit are like the younger generation, and there's probably a maximum time for them to capitalize on it before they get weary as well. So I think my question to you is, like, what would you say the younger generation, what should we do to make all of this happen for the younger generation? Is cannabis advocacy going to be the main kind of, going to get the ball rolling, you know, and we can start to build a dream? Because right now it's a big pipe dream, and it feels like we're going against, you know, like titans who have all this money and power that we don't have. So, yeah.
I was a young person when I started. Again, like I said, this campaign took 10 years, a decade of my life at least. I think it's really critical for young people to be a part of the research building for the conversation, and to be part of the mapping of what the problem is, so that they can envision what they want the solution to be, because you build in buy-in. So I think oftentimes we tell young people what the problem is, but don't give them the opportunity to do the discovery. And oftentimes young people are already discovering it, but aren't given the resources or the infrastructure to build upon it and to make it generative. And I also think it's really important for us to remember what the big goal is, but to have little fights. Because little fights are what feed you. For us, when we started the campaign in 2010, my first little win was when we got the municipal government to acknowledge that it was a problem, right? And putting young people on camera to talk about the issue, right? What are the things that feed advocacy, that give you the opportunity? Part of the weariness is that sometimes you're pulling from nothing. And it is dark way more than it is light. And so for us, it's like, how do you build little wins? Like, what are the things that you need to keep building upon it, so that as you get more and more wins, you get stronger and stronger? And so for us, we had a ton of little wins, be it in the media, getting an op-ed or an editorial, being the face or the mouthpiece for it, people being able to say their story or why things are important for them. I think oftentimes people build campaigns and then they bring the young people in to give their perspective, but are we building campaigns with young people and giving them the opportunity to get paid? Are we paying young people? Are they benefiting from it in any way besides for their esteem? Are they seeing pathways to be a part of these organizations that are making decisions? Are they a part of decision making, or are they always being told what the decision is? I think there are ways that we have to shift the way that we do advocacy, because part of the weariness that we experience is no doubt the struggles of being like Black, but it's also because of how are our own people listening to us and investing in our leadership. And I want to be really clear. Drug Policy Alliance is a historically white dominant organization. I'm one of few black people at the organization. I just happen to be in charge now, right? That happened 2 years ago, sorry. But I'm not. But it really is about recognizing what are the different ways that you can make pathways for black voices and for black people to not be isolated. Because I'm one of few people at the organization for a really long time, I found black people in other organizations to back me up. So when I was taking punches, right, or taking cuts, that I wasn't the only one feeling it, and that there were other people tending to my wounds that are not just myself. I think weariness and advocacy is a part of it, but we don't have to be so weary so fast. And a lot of people burn out because the way that we campaign is not sustainable. And so I'm down to talk to you afterwards about ways to build more sustainable and generative ways of organizing, because the truth is, if the whole point of the system is to make us weary. The whole point is to tire us out. And if we're not building strategies that are generative, that we're not finding joy in our work, and that we're not finding wins, little wins, ways to reframe what we are experiencing, we're only going to get more tired, and then we won't be able to win, and the people that come after us won't be able to build on the things that we need. My life purpose is for when I die, that black people are further than what I was born into. Like that is a part of the ancestral work. And as I said before, my Afro-Caribbean identity of being Haitian is a lesson for me that I come back to over and over and over and over again. You know, they didn't win the revolution in 1 year, and it's been 217 years, and we're still not really free of capitalism and white supremacy and imperialist conversations. But young people in Haiti are still fighting, right? And as a young diasporan, that is Haitian, is still fighting for global black people, as was the example that Haiti offered to others. So yes, we are supposed to be weary, right? That's part of the game. But we cannot afford to burn out. And sometimes we take rest, but it is a marathon. And so as you figure out that you are getting tired, who are you building up behind so that you could pass the baton to? We don't have to finish the whole fight. Not all of us have to stay in the fight for the rest of our lives, but figure out what you can offer and make sure that you build so that someone can take your place when you sit on the sidelines.
Beautiful. Closing remarks. I want to bring the evening to a close. I want to remind people that it is a conversation, it's a journey that we're on, and we invite you to join us. We'll send out information because we've got your details, so you know what we're planning going forwards. And to those who've been live streaming in, contact details are on the live stream for you to do the same. We've got a high watermark event in September with our allies. September the 26th is planned. If there's something you want to contribute to that event, please let us know. And our intention is for it to be an annual event, and it can only work if the broad leadership is involved in that process. We are in the States in April, and we may do something from there, but again, we will keep you posted. I'm taking away a lot of gems, as I'm sure you are. I want to thank you for taking the time to come out on a chilly Wednesday evening. I really appreciate it. And we had over 100 people sign up, just over, and I shut it there because you never know with our community. You think, okay, 100 people sign up, between 30 and 50 will turn up, but you never know. You could get 130. I mean, the last event was very, very, very well attended. And so I'm grateful that we've had an intimate group, and I'm looking forward to working with those of you who've got organizations or individually as we move it on. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So thank you again for your time, and we've got time to mingle because it's our building. There's no one's going to be rushing us out. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you. And to Kassandra for taking the time to spend with us on a busy schedule in the UK. And to all the other panelists, please. Thank you. Yeah, can we get a shot with the panelists? Just follow Damien, our rock star photographer. Oh, this way. Panelists, Kassandra.
Yeah, bro. Come on, bro. Hey, man, that's it. Bro, I think I know this brother, but I forgot.
I saw you, I was like, bro, like this guy, you can't forget this guy, man. Yeah. Come on, man. How's your Youth Black Network? That's your charity, right?
Youth Black Network.
Young Black Network.
No, not part Youth Black.
Jane.
Black back in uni.
Oh, that was it. That was it. Yeah.
I moved on now, so
Right.
different things.
No, but bro, all the same, like even back then, I was so in awe of that, bro, because I was like, no one was on that wave.
No, we
and even though I would have loved to make